All right, so many of you in this room looking around are already embedded in trying to figure this out for us, and some of you are brand new. So this is really for level setting for people who are just arriving, to MIT. I was actually in a meeting recently with some faculty that said, have you guys ever thought about decarbonizing the campus? Because we really ought to do that. So it's hard to communicate everything that's going on at such a broad campus with so many different focal points. So if you end up in one of those meetings, just point them our direction. That's bound to happen, and it's totally okay. So again, for those of you who haven't been involved, back in our first climate action plan came out in 2015. The one that we're speaking with today came out in 2021. And at that time, MIT committed to eliminating all direct emissions from the campus by 2050, but with a near-term commitment of 2026, which was really important because it gave us something in the short term, to focus on. It enabled us to actually level set with our friends at Harvard, with the city of Cambridge and other peers, and asking the big question as to what do you do in the near term while you grapple with and engineer and prepare for and develop regulatory environment for what has to happen by 2050. So today is going to be focused on this long-term planning and what has to happen across these structures. So keep in mind, and again, this is a framing that we work with internally, but I think this will really play into what you hear from the city and the state, is that we're all grappling with what the new energy era is going to look like, but it has to be, it's integrated with the legacy of the past, right? So this frames MIT's trajectory, beginning with coal in 1916, right? For those of you familiar with where the railroad is, moving to oil, natural gas, cogeneration in 95. And then into our advanced cogen plant as our bridging technology and our bridging energy system in 2021. So the question that's on all of our minds and the challenge that we've taken on with a massive team here is then how do we transition our bridging technology into this zero carbon future? Again, for those of you just joining us, we have had a process in place that we started. We've been thinking about this and studying this for many years, but we officially kicked off with the development of a formal plan. We went through this discovery process in April to October 2023. We brought in an outside consultant working collectively with our internal staff, faculty, and students in terms of identifying beginning to prepare and identify the opportunities, And then we've been working since this past January on what that plan is. So the purpose of these forums is to begin to socialize the context of the plan that will be coming out so that all of you and the broader MIT community understands that we are not developing and planning for 2050 in isolation of the city or the state, because it's a very complex regulatory environment and we're managing legacy infrastructure. And for those of you who are faculty and students also in the audience today, we did launch a working group about a year and a half ago to start to navigate the research front of this, as we have so many faculty working on this, as you've heard with the climate project, and really tapping into the expertise around the campus. Okay, so to close out and transition to Julie and Melissa here, in terms of reducing our direct emissions, so you can listen carefully to this as we hear from the city and the state, is we're grappling with generation. How do we integrate large scale, new heat pumps, cleaner heat generation, and reduce fossil fuel into the future? What is the distribution system? How do we convert this legacy high pressure steam system? And then, of course, how do we use less energy? And the context for today is, since day one, when we launched our office and we launched our efforts, we said we can't do any of this in isolation. We constantly have to work and grapple and plan across scales in terms of what's the role of the individual, in this case, setting our sights on zero. What roles do individuals have to play in a decarbonized campus? What has to take place on the campus in the context of the city, the state, the nation, and the globe. And at this stage, we actually all align on 2050. So there are some short-term commitments which may vary from 2026 to 2030, 2035, depending upon the plan. But we're all looking out to this zero carbon future by 2050. So that's the segue today, and we're also managing a new regulatory environment. So as you'll see just in our interactions, and as you'll hear, we're working, we've built the relationships to work together on this, and that's going to be, I think, at the key to actually succeeding. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Julie and Melissa. We're so fortunate Julie came to us. She's the new inaugural Chief Climate Officer to lead the city's climate resiliency and sustainability plan. And we've actually interacted with Julie over many years, so we're so glad that you're here today. And Melissa Lavinson, similarly, we met through the Green Ribbon Commission, and she's taking on this first new role in establishing the nation's first Office of Energy Transformation. And so Julie, as I mentioned, she was co-founder of the Resilient Mystic Collaborative prior to joining us in Cambridge, and the senior policy advisor to the Mystic River Watershed Association. So brings deep community engagement roots to all of this. She also served as the executive director of the Boston Harbor Association and co-led the Boston Living with Water International Design Competition with the City of Boston and the Boston Society of Architects. So such a unique background to work with all of us. And Melissa, who will join after that, is the executive director, as I said, of the Office of Energy Transformation for the Commonwealth. And she previously served as the head of corporate affairs, leading National Grid state and municipal governments relations, community and stakeholder engagement, media relations, municipal customer engagement, strategic communications, and the company's equity and energy initiative, and the Grid for Good philanthropic program in New England. So you can hear why they tapped Melissa. She was also Senior Vice President of the Federal Government and Regulatory Affairs and Public Policy at Exelon Corporation, and Senior Vice President of Government and External Affairs for Pepco Holdings. So as you can see, we have remarkable women in these roles with exactly the right experience to come together on all this. What will happen is Julie will give a brief overview of Cambridge. We'll then hear from Melissa, and then we'll be available for questions and discussions from all of us to help continue to inform our thinking and how we best work together. So Julie, come on up.
Thank you so much. So we are all getting to carbon neutrality, and here in this is also almost ground zero, in that if we're not able to do this at MIT and Harvard and in Cambridge, no one will. So the work we're doing here, really, if it stays within the boundaries of Cambridge, it's a fail. If we do this by muscling through with the extra resources we have and don't contribute to the larger conversation, whether it's in the state or the country or the world, it's a fail. So we are doing extraordinary things in Cambridge, but I also want us to think about how can we try things out that don't actually work so that other people don't have to also. How can we focus on things that are cheaper, more durable, plug and play, such that the rest of the world is able to also follow where we're going. So in terms of Cambridge, we have set the regulatory framework for going to zero over the course of time. First are the big institutions, whether it's MIT, Harvard, a lot of Kendall Square, the municipality itself, where we have to take our big buildings and be carbon neutral even before 2050. So BUTO is what covers all of these very large non-residential buildings. In addition, if you build a new building or do a major retrofit, you can no longer install fossil fuels. In addition, if you do a new building or do a major retrofit, you have to become extremely energy efficient. Basically twice the norm of a 2009 building, but 3 times the norm of a normal Cambridge building. As you know, they're pretty old. But what I also want to say, it's about the carbon, but it's also not just about the carbon. So my work in Cambridge is not just how do we get off of fossil fuels, but how do we do so in a way that we don't further cause people to leave because it's so damn expensive to work here? So we have people in subsidized housing, we have people who are essentially self-subsidized, but much of the remaining residences in small buildings or small businesses are going to have a very hard time making these investments. So we're really focusing on what the city can do to bring that cost and complexity down. At the same time, again, if we succeed in our carbon goals, but people are flooded out, people die of the heat, that's also a fail. So when we are doing our climate work, how can we retain beauty? How can we retain joy? How can we create solutions that are also solving for neighborliness? So what I do want to say, because here's an audience of people who do know how to get the numbers down to zero. The way we do this does blend all the ways that we are human beings. And when we are successful, it's because we've done it together. For the deets, here comes Melissa. But I do want to say how we do this is also going to be very important. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Let me just put this over here. So I think that was a great segue, great setup. So I'm Melissa Lavinson. I'm heading up the Office of Energy Transformation for the Commonwealth. And as Julie said, it's a new office. So what I'm going to do is provide just a little background on the office and why it was created, a little policy setting context, and then how we're going to go about do our work. And the reason why I say Julie's last comment is a great segue is because that's basically what we're focused on. We're focused on how do we do this together, because it's going to take all of us working together, identifying the solutions, identifying the changes that have to happen, and then all aligning around how to make that transition. And do it in a way that works for everyone. And I think that's the trick to this whole thing. So Office of Energy Transformation, recently established office, and it was established for two reasons. One, to help enable that hands-on execution of the energy transition, focused on gas to electric coordination, electric grid readiness, and a just and equitable transition for workers, for communities, and for businesses alike. And that's really important, because when you think about that, the energy system is something we all rely on. It's foundational to everything we do, and how we change it impacts each of us differently depending on the relationship we have with that system, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the second thing that was focused on doing, and the reason why it was brought together, was to do just that together, to really establish a collective path forward that's going to allow us to accelerate the investments we need to make, accelerate the process change, accelerate the technology deployment by working together. And doing this, we've established an energy advisory board. Julie sits on that, and Julie Newman sits on that. We have two Julies here. As do 70 other kind of leaders from across the Commonwealth. And we had our first meeting about 2-3 weeks ago. And what was really remarkable about that was everybody showed up. 90% of the folks showed up in person. Took 3-4 hours of the day, all these senior leaders from across the Commonwealth, to sit down and figure out a path forward, how we're going to work together, what we're going to focus on, and how we're going to get there. And they did that, and they came together with a consensus. And to me, that was a great start. And while it was a focus on process, and I'll talk a little bit about that, about what the process is, that's the beginning. That's what effective change management is about, and that's what we're actually talking about here, is really a massive change management effort like we've never seen before. So why are we doing this? I think we all know we have an imperative to act on climate change. We all know why in this room. And in Massachusetts, we've been leading on that. We've been doing a lot. We've got net zero greenhouse gas goals, as Julie mentioned. And the thing that's unique about Massachusetts, and a few other states have this though, is our goals aren't just goals. They're mandates. They're enshrined in law. And so one of the things about Massachusetts is we have enshrined much of what we need to do into law around our greenhouse gas reduction goals, around our energy efficiency goals, our renewable goals, our offshore wind goals. These are all been enshrined in law, and so we are now in the process of implementing those laws through programs, through initiatives, right, through policies at the agency level. And as we're doing that, and particularly under the Haley-Driscoll administration, we're doing that and doing it in a way where we really do have that focus on equity, on affordability, right, on how we're going to be moving forward together, on how we're going to create economic opportunity while we do it. Because as an administration, we really do feel that if we do this right, it can not only help us achieve our goals, but do it in a way where we actually do have a much more equitable, affordable energy system, and one that's providing tremendous opportunities across the Commonwealth in terms of economic growth and development. So how are we doing that? So we've got the laws, now we're implementing policies, and I want to focus on three regulations that have come out, or regulatory orders that have come out of the Department of Public Utilities. So they're the entity that regulates the utilities in the Commonwealth, and the reason why we're focused on this, and it's a big piece of why this office was established, was because if you think about it, the utilities are foundational, right? They have the energy infrastructure, they run the energy infrastructure, they invest in it. And so the regulatory construct in which they're doing that, in which they're making those investments, that's really going to drive the investments. And so there's three orders that came out in the past year that have really created the box in which we're going to be moving forward that pathway. One is around the future of gas. So what is the future of the natural gas system? What's the future of gas in the Commonwealth? And based on the law and the implementation of that law through the order, we are taking an electrification-based pathway, right, towards achieving our decarbonization goals. So that means looking at how we're going to be moving away from a system where we're reliant on both gas and electric to one we're more reliant on electric, right? So that does have then implications for the electric system. The second order that came out recently, and we were just talking about this before we started, is we're looking at both the infrastructure on the gas side, but looking at gas supply as well. One of the other orders that came out was we have a big piece of fossil fuel infrastructure that sits very close to where we are right now in Everett. It's a liquefied natural gas facility. It provides about 10% of the state's gas supply on those coldest days. So that's peak days where we all, fire up our furnaces and get warm. It provides a resource to the state. It's also an expensive resource. And it's one where the utilities have entered into contracts for 6 years to have that insurance policy. And when they got the orders approving those contracts, the commission said to them that that's great, we're gonna approve them now, but this asset is inconsistent with where we're going. And we need you all to work together to figure out how we are not going to be reliant on this piece of fossil fuel infrastructure going forward. So that's shaping, again, what we're doing. So we've looked at the infrastructure on gas of where we're moving to, right? Less reliant on the pipeline system. We've looked now at supply, trying to reduce the supply, right, that we're using in the state. And then finally, we need an electric system that can handle all this. And so the utilities all submitted plans around what they need to do to invest in the electric system in the state. And the DPU approved those plans with some modification, but basically said, okay, we understand where you need to go, the investments you need to make. We're approving these plans at a high level with some modifications, and now you need to come back in and tell us in detail how you're going to move forward, the order of the investments, and we'll work through how we're going to actually establish that investment pathway. And so what is that going to do in the electric grid? It's going to really change the grid. So if you think about the grid that we have, and many of you in this room understand the electric grid very well, but it was designed to do something, and it does it very well. And it's done it the same way for about 100 years. It's been changing a bit, but it was designed to take electricity generated from really big power plants, sometimes far away, move them across a series of wires, transmission and distribution to homes and businesses, where we used it in pretty predictable ways. And we've been doing this for about 100 years. Where we're going, though, is really different. We're going in a really different way because, one, we have an imperative to do it, right? We need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. We need to move away. We need to decarbonize the electricity that we're producing and consuming. And it's changing because we have a lot of new technology. We have a lot of new technology on the customer side that allows us to generate our own electricity, to store it, to be more resilient, to use it when we want to use it, to help manage affordability, right, and costs, and when we use it, how we use it, the products that we're using it for, the end uses. And we're also electrifying more, right? Much more of the economy is dependent on this. So it's a much more dynamic system. It's a system that needs a lot of technology upgrade to work well, to both accommodate more and more clean energy resources and also to become more resilient over time. And there needs to be a lot of technology on that kind of end use side, that distribution side, right before it gets to the home or business, that's going to allow you all as customers, right, all of us end users, to optimize and use energy differently. So now we're going to be using it in less predictable ways. So this is a challenge. It's a challenge of how do we get from yesterday's grid to tomorrow's grid, and doing that is going to enable us to move off a gas system, right, to decarbonize our economy and to make it a much more equitable and affordable and cleaner energy economy than we have today. So a couple of things that I want to focus on. So you saw was really busy on that end of the graph, right? And you saw different technologies all along the way. The challenge isn't necessarily technology. In fact, this was a quote from the Secretary of Energy and Environment here in Massachusetts, actually at the meeting of the Energy Transformation Advisory Board just a few weeks ago. She said this: the solutions, ideas, innovations needed to transform our energy system equitably, affordably, and sustainably exist today. Now, we might have better ones in the future, et cetera, but when you really think about it, we know what to do. We have the technologies. So why haven't we deployed them all? And she made this other comment right after that, which was the challenge is to stay focused on the urgency of the moment and find a consensus path forward. And it's that consensus path forward, and as Julie acknowledged, right, we have legacy systems that we are reliant on, that we use, and so we need to figure out how do we change them, the order in which we change them, what's the implications of changing them, and how do we do that together, because that's the only way we're going to make this massive kind of change management happen. And change management is really predicated on three things when you think about it, right? There's the technology side, and we just talked about that. We have the technology. Great. Then we need to change the processes, right? Because if you implement new technologies, you use things differently, things operate differently. And so many folks in this room, engineers, right, they understand that. It's not just you put a technology out there, there's stuff behind that has to work, and there's an order of operation. We have to do that. So that's great. And we probably know how to change the processes to adopt the technologies and optimize them. So, okay, technology process. So again, why? Why is it a challenge in terms of accelerating this transition? And it's sort of that people part, right? And the people part is really important. And that's where a lot of change management efforts typically fail, is because we don't focus on people. We focus on those first two a lot. But we need people, right, to design the technologies, processes, figure out how best to deploy them. We need people to operate them, to be trained, right, and how to use them. It's not just as simple as just, putting it in and then everybody knows how to use it. We all think differently, learn differently, so we need to do that. We need people to adopt the technologies, right? So people here at MIT, you guys are cutting edge, you're leading, you're adopting these technologies. The average person, they don't know the technology exists or how to use it or what to do about it, or it's hard, it's expensive. And then we need to make sure that we've got the financing, right? The businesses that are investing in these technologies to help us to deploy them, right? And make sure that everybody has the opportunity to deploy them. So it's that people part that we really need to focus on, and that's a lot of what we're doing in the work of the Energy Transformation Office. And to put a little finer point on the people part and why we brought 70 leaders together on an energy advisory board, you might say 70, that's a lot. We need it. We need it because, back to the energy system, we all rely on it, like every single day. All aspects of the economy rely on it. So therefore we all have a relationship with it. And so that means we bring a perspective, but our perspective is based on the relationship that we have with the energy system. And that's what makes this change management so challenging, right? We all have a different perspective about what needs to change and why and how based on the relationship we have. So if you operate fossil fuel infrastructure, if you're employed by a company that operates fossil fuel infrastructure, you have one vision of it. If you're a utility, you have another relationship and perspective with it. If you're a company that's deploying clean energy, developing it, you have another one. If you're a customer that actually has to really make a hard choice every month about, do I pay my utility bill or do I pay for my medicine and food? You have a really different relationship with it. Or if I live next to that infrastructure and how it impacts my air, my water, right, my health, my family, my open space, I have a different perspective. And so we have to figure out how to bring all those perspectives together in order to actually move from where we are to where we need to go. And the interesting thing about it is everyone has a relationship with it. We all rely on it. And I'd say probably 90 to 95% of the people don't fully understand how it operates. And why should they, right? They just know, they walk in, we turn on the light switch, it's there, it's operated really well the same way for 100 years, you don't really think about it a lot. But there's a handful of people, and probably some people in this room, that really understand how it operates. So when you sort of think about, again, that relationship, it's really easy to say, I've got a coal plant, and so well, if we're going to decarbonize, I've got the technology, renewables, so just unplug the coal plant and plug in the renewables, right? There you go, we've got the land, we've got a place to plug it in, just do it. Maybe we can do that, but if you think about it, that coal plant could be in a place where the wind doesn't blow very often, or where there's not enough solarity, so you really can't make it up with solar and wind, or there's not enough land to put the storage that you would need to make sure that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you can still generate electricity. So then, if you think about that and say, okay, well, I can, figure out, take the coal plant off, I need the same capacity on this side with clean energy. Okay, now I have that equation, but now I gotta find land to site all the clean energy. I gotta work with another community about, do you want it there, and where can I put it, and were you gonna think about using that land for something else? I've gotta then build the infrastructure to get the power to where the people are, because it might be in a different place, and then I need the workforce to do that, right? It's a workforce to build it, to operate it, and that workforce now was maybe where the coal plant was, now it might be in a different part of the state or region. And so in order to get from one place to another, there's a process, there's an order, there's an understanding, and that's what we need to do. We need to understand and have that dialogue and conversation about what it really takes and how do we move through it in order to actually get to where we want to go, which is moving the coal to the clean energy and getting it to people as we electrify. And that's the challenge, and that's what we're doing. So how are we doing that in this state? We've got policies, we've got programs, we've got a lot of things. What is this office doing, and why do we create it? What's different? We're doing this, we're bringing this group of individuals together, right, these leaders together to work through issues in a really tangible way. A lot of times we talk about policy and what is policy implementation, and we talk about it up here. But when you actually then try to bring it down to that community level, that asset level, back to that coal plant analogy, you have to understand, right, an asset, what it's used for, how it operates, why it's there, what are the alternatives to meeting the need that asset met, and then you got to figure out, okay, now what are the steps of getting there or replacing it? And so we're going to do this focused on some tangible things. So the three things we're focused on is we're going to look at how do we eliminate a major fossil fuel asset. That asset is that Everett Marine Terminal LNG facility that I mentioned. It sits over there, 10% of the peak demand need for gas in the state. We have the 6-year contracts. So if we're saying we don't want to be reliant on that anymore, and we've got 3 utilities that rely on it, that means we need a shared solution for how we're going to do that. So we're going to be looking at that, and that's going to require us to make a series of binary choices of what do we have to do, where do we do it, what's the order in which we have to do that. The second one that we're looking at is how do we reduce our reliance on fossil fuel-fired peaking power plants and combined heat and power facilities. So if you think about that, we're going to be moving to a system that's more electrified, and that's going to be more reliant on intermittent resources like wind and solar. And we're going to be relying more on electricity in the wintertime, which means our peak is going to go up, and it's going to go up in the time of year where there's not as much solar available. And that's a resource we rely on. So we could be much more reliant on fossil fuel-fired peaking power plants to meet that peak need in the wintertime. So we're going to start now looking at how do we reduce our reliance on that, both reducing demand, but also what are other supply options to meeting that need. And we're looking at 4 facilities around the state, one in Pittsfield, one in West Springfield, one on Cape Cod, Canal Station, it's there at Sandwich, and then Tufts is looking at their CHP facility. It's about a 4-megawatt facility over in Medford. So we're going to be looking at it, again, on a very tangible way of what do these assets do today, how are they compensated, how do they run, what could you do to replace them, and then what's the order of operation that you have to go through to do that. And then finally, we're looking at how do we make this affordable. Back to that focus for the Healey-Driscoll administration, equity, affordability, right, opportunity. This is going to cost, right? But it's going to cost us anyway, right? We're going to be making investments in a system to meet future demand growth. We're seeing it anyway. We're going to be investing more in a system to build resilience because we're seeing the impacts of climate change. So now we're also going to be investing, right, to meet our electrification, our climate goals. And so there is an incremental cost. And so how do we finance that? Right now we finance it on a utility bill. We're going to be looking at alternative ways of maybe financing some of these costs. Are there ways to finance it that might be more equitable, right? That might be more affordable, that might kind of cost, have a lower cost of capital. So we're going to be really looking at that and digging in. So those are the three focus areas. Again, very tangible, very, I can touch it, I can feel it, I can see it, and I understand the binary choices I'm making and what the outcomes are associated with each of those choices. And so we're going to go through a process. Back to we all have a relationship with this energy system, but we all maybe don't understand it, or we come at it with different perspectives. So this is really how you go through change management, right? You have to go through it in phases. And the first phase is, let's build a common understanding of where we are, where we need to go, why we're doing it, right? What some of the issues are, the barriers, and bring the perspectives to it of the why people might have different perspectives of the pace of change and the kind of change that we need. Then we're going to go through and identify and evaluate the alternatives. So again, that's why we picked very tangible things, so that we could go through in very tangible ways and identify alternatives to those assets, right, to that infrastructure. And then figuring out what are the recommendations, how are we going to implement it. And back to that meeting that we had a few weeks ago, the remarkable thing was everyone around in that room, I would say around the table, but we couldn't all fit around a table. So everyone in that room all agreed that this was the right approach. This is how we have to move through it. These are the kinds of conversations that we have to have. We're not going to rush to the end of the story like we all want to, right? We're all really smart people, and everybody in that room could have come up with, probably 10 different ways of solving each one of those issues. But everyone recognized that they needed to hold back, understand where everybody was, and move through this in a methodical way, and commit to doing that, commit to working together, and commit to actually working to implement it and to educating folks on why we're doing it, the way we're doing it, and what needs to be done. So that's what we're doing at the Office of Energy Transformation. That's why we're doing it, and look forward to the questions.